My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with thought leader, best-selling author, and managing director at Saramount, Steve Pemberton. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Drew. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and I'm excited to speak to you again because the last time I interviewed you was about a year ago. And the
Uh,
last time we spoke, you discussed the Lighthouse effect, which is your examination into the qualities of guiding figures in our lives. More recently, you've been speaking about what you call the anchor principle. So I'll start off with a big, broad question. What is the anchor principle?
what I wanted to do after the lighthouse effect was better understand how we feel anchored and grounded in our life and looking at it through three different lenses. What anchors us in our work life and professional life, what anchors us in our personal life, and then what anchors us in our community life. Because I do think that these are challenging times on a multiplicity of levels. And I think we're asking that question of ourselves, of each other, of our organizations, of our communities. And taking a research based approach to that question, I thought was going to be very instructive.
And what kind of research goes into writing a book like this, whether it's interviews or structuring everything out? What is the actual writing process like for you?
Well, if you think about the difference between a researcher and a journalist, a researcher, in essence, is trying to understand what the story is. Oftentimes, journalists will have had a tip, some semblance of a story already, and then they're chasing down some of the details of it, but they basically have a sense of what that story might be. The researcher is trying to determine what is the actual narrative and therefore is open to different interpretations, different views. And so you wind up writing, and I'm in the process of writing now. You wind up writing, a different book, Drew, depending on what that research shares back with you. The other value of taking a research-based approach is different than what I did in the Lighthouse Effect, which was taking these 10 stories of people who I met along my life journey, whose lives to me were examples to all of us and embodied all the lessons of the lighthouse. Taking a more research based view moves it beyond the anecdote into revelations and I think reflections and suggests to us that there are some things that ground us perhaps in ways that we might not always recognize or see.
And the anchor principle, it's not only the subject of your newest book, it is something that you speak about publicly to a variety of groups, whether it's a corporate audience or a high school audience. What are the responses that you're seeing from this subject matter?
Well, a few. The first is that we are number one looking for things that do ground us and provide a sense of stability and certainty. The other is that we're questioning the traditional places that we have sought that from. If you look at trust barometers, for example, that assess where do we place our allegiances, our trust, our loyalty? Well, in this current time, it's very different than what we've seen before. It's not necessarily the media that we are digesting. We have questions about that. It's not necessarily in who we vote for because we don't have a lot of trust there in that kind of system and structure. And so the question is, where are you turning? And you're turning to those things that ground you, and specifically the traditional places that have been the sources of trust for us have largely evaporated. And that doesn't mean that we're not looking for trust in other places. We actually are. And it's in the people alongside whom we work and in the places and spaces that we work. That's where trust is. That's where our anchors are.
So when you're delivering this talk to different audiences, whether it's a corporate audience or a high school audience, I'm assuming that you have a completely different delivery structure. How do you go about customizing your keynotes for different audiences?
Well, I want to spend a great deal of time understanding that organization's mission and the theme of the conference. I was once in the position of selecting speakers to come to corporations and or nonprofits where I was a board member. And in my role in corporate America, I certainly wanted to know whether or not whomever I invited was going to fully embrace the concept and the ideas that were important to us as an organization that I was expecting them as a speaker to deliver. Now, I can tell you that the overwhelming majority of them delivered, but some did not. and in part because I felt that they had not done their homework. So that's never far from my mind that someone has, in essence, said, we should have Steve here, or a committee has decided we should have Steve here. So that means that I need to tailor my addresses to reflect exactly what their mission is. So it's the me, it's the you, and then it's the we. So who am I? And why have you invited me? Spend less time on that. More the you, what is important to you as an organization in this moment, in this time. And then the we part is where we spend the majority of our time. What is the way forward here? And to do that in a way that is collective. So it's very hard to find me delivering the exact same talk because no two organizations are exactly alike. They have different needs. They have different, aspirations. Oftentimes, I catch the organizations off guard, Drew, because I'm asking them a level of detail that perhaps they aren't accustomed to hearing a speaker ask. But they also know that I fully intend to embrace the mission of that organization and their theme when I arrive.
Steve Pemberton is a man who does his homework.
I do. I don't dot the I and cross the T, Drew. I'm focused on the J because that's the letter in the alphabet that's dotted and crossed. Is really that level of detail. And
That's
again, the importance of those moments, 45 minutes, an hour, book signing, there's always something important happening in those exchanges. And it's one of the privilege of being a speaker is that you are invited in to an organization. You get to be part of their family for a day. And like any other family, when you walk through the door, you're respectful. You're appreciative of being there. You take your hat off and you leave your shoes by the front door if that's what they request of you. It's not about you. That's never been lost on me. The last time it's about me is when they send me a notice saying, "Hey, we'd love to have you, and here's why." After that, everything has to be about that organization.
certainly that is a fantastic mindset to have. Staying on the topic of your newest projects, I hear that there's a new podcast coming out. What could you
Yeah.
tell us about your new podcasts?
Some years ago, I wrote my first book called The Chance in the World because my children were asking me about the origins of my parents. They started with me, and it wound up being a much bigger story that included generations before me. And, during that, when I wrote that and arrived in the mail, I said, great, I'm done, and I can kind of move back to my normal life. Well, I'm still trying to move back to my normal life. Book went viral, wound up on bestseller lists, and a movie. I mean, it's an honor. It is an honor to be on the receiving end of that kind of interest and support. But like any other project that you undertake, there's always different forms that it can take on. Well, the time that I wrote A Chance in the World, podcasting was in its infancy, and so a podcast now is an opportunity for me to revisit the first book, but with a lot of life lessons of overcoming, of family, faith, fortitude, resilience that really does touch and impact all of our lives. So in season one, I am revisiting A Chance in the World. I'm sharing some stories that I've not shared before, and at the same time, providing what's unfolded in the years since the book has been written, the stories that I have encountered, the impact that the book has had in ways that I could never have imagined. I intend it to be a podcast of uplift, of inspiration, of support to kind of meet you where you are, particularly in these times where that's probably never been more important for us to feel a degree of hopefulness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot to look forward to. Steve, I think one of the last questions I want to ask you is that you kind of brought it up. In a world that is seemingly filled with negativity and pessimism, what are you optimistic about, Steve?
The optimism that I have comes from the people that I meet as I spend my time with all different kinds of organizations and have over this last decade plus, actually. It's hard to find hopefulness if each day you are bombarded by dissonance and discord and cynicism. On the one hand, we have to recognize that there is a certain kind of profitability that comes from focusing on the negative. But I don't think that's the real story. I don't think it's how you woke up this morning. I know it's not how I woke up this morning. It's not how most of us wake up, actually. Most of us wake up trying to, in some way, shape, or form, better the world around us, whether it's through our own individual families, the lives of our children, or the organizations of which we're a part. I mean, I think that's the real story. But I also want to suggest to us that maybe hope is a bit more subtle than we have been imagining it, that maybe it is not loud and boisterous and overly manufactured. Maybe hope is just the quiet, small things, the ordinary people who wake up each day trying to better the world around them. And I meet them all the time. I am in awe of their commitment. The paths that they have chosen aren't really careers, they're more like callings. And I see this unfolding in nonprofit organizations, in educational systems, and in corporate America. So, this idea that we are a place, right? We are in a place that is beyond hope is not accurate. But I do think we're looking in the wrong places, and candidly, oftentimes to the wrong individuals. One of the people that I wrote about in my second book was a high school counselor who took me in when I was 16 years old, and I literally had nowhere to go. It was 3 days after Christmas, very difficult situation. And he opened his home and his heart to me. And one of the things that John Sykes always talked about was something that his father had always talked to him about. And it was embodied in a single word: character. To John and to his father, that meant more to him than anything else. It was really the personification of everything. And for John, there was a very short walk between character and hope. You know, that if you were a person of good character and did seek to better the world around you, then you were the embodiment of hope. And that's something that I'm still trying to live up to.
That is so beautifully said, Steve. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that.
Well, that will conclude our conversation with Steve Pemberton. Steve, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Drew.